It's International Podcast Day 2017, and I'm pleased to introduce Annemarie Cross, our presenter from Australia, because International Podcast Day is a global event, and Australia and New Zealand get to experience it before everyone else does. That's the way the sun works and the way the globe turns. So Annemarie Cross began podcasting in 2008, before some of us even discovered podcasts, and she wanted to be the voice of inspiration and hope among the deluge of doom and gloom stories being portrayed across all traditional media channels after the global financial crisis devastated families worldwide. And now, 9 years on, now dubbed the podcasting queen by her guests, colleagues, and clients, Annemarie continues to be the voice of inspiration through her own award-winning business and leadership-focused podcasts, and the podcasts she hosts and produces for her clients through her media company, the Ambitious Entrepreneur Podcast Network. Annemarie Cross from Australia will be sharing with us podcasting with purpose, how to monetize your message while becoming an influential voice in your industry. Annemarie Cross, thank you very much for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you so much for that lovely welcome. Hi, everybody. You'll have to excuse me. I have just come off the back of a terrible bout of the flu, so my voice is very stuffy, but really very excited to be able to share this message with you today. It's so exciting, the amount of people who are recognizing the power of podcasting, the relationships that are being built, and the amazing collegial alliances that are being built along the way too, as more and more people are podcasting. So the reason I wanted to share this message is that, many of my colleagues are now seeing just how effective podcasting is in a way to engage with people, deeper relationships, joint venture opportunities, and of course clients, but also as a really amazing way to share your voice, use it as a platform in which to empower people, inspire people all over the world. And I noticed earlier that the country Zimbabwe was mentioned. I think, Daniel, you mentioned that you had a special place in your heart for Zimbabwe. Well, I still produce my podcast here in my home-based office, but I remember a couple of years in, 2010, 2011, I think, I was reached out by one of our listeners who was someone in Zimbabwe and asked if they would be able to syndicate my show on their local radio station. And it's like, wow, I mean, amazing. And I say to people, you never know where your voice ends up. You will never know where your voice ends up. And in actual fact, just in the last couple of months, they've reached back out. We did that for a season all those years ago, but they've reached back out and now on another radio local radio station in Zimbabwe. Now for 5 minutes a day, I get to be able to inspire other aspiring entrepreneurs as they begin their business journey. So again, you never know where your voice may end up. But what I see with a lot of podcasters, unfortunately, or business owners who want to use podcast as a platform, is there are some things that they do and they don't do that means that they're not really hitting the ground running. They're not really generating the returns on the investment. It takes a lot of time and energy. I know many of you would agree with me, to be able to produce a really good podcast. And if you don't have the right steps in place, then it can take a long time, if ever. And I remember back to 2008 when we first started, as Daniel was mentioning, I was in the career industry then here in Australia, and that was when the global financial crisis hit. And at that time, I had a contract with a company called Career Ladders, and it was devastating to coach some of these management accountants. I worked with a lot of professionals and executives who were trying to go for jobs for $2.50 an hour, being paid $2.50 an hour. It was really devastating. And here in Australia, typical, media, doom and gloom about how things were not working and how it was impossible. And yes, it was. Things had changed. And we knew, a co-host and I, or a colleague and I, who was also in the career industry, we knew that while things were difficult, they were not hopeless. And we knew we needed to be a voice of inspiration amongst the doom and gloom. And we thought, you know what, let's start an online radio. That we didn't even know the word podcast then. And we had no idea what we were doing. But what pulled us forward, what really drove us, was the the knowing that we had to be that voice of inspiration, hope and positivity. And so we did that for 2 years. And looking back, some of the things that I do now and that I share with a lot of my clients, we did not do. So whilst our show back then, it became known as Career Success Radio. We did that for 2 years. It was an awesome show. We were able to impact the lives of many people. We grew some great relationships with other career professionals all over the world. But we really didn't monetize. And there was a number of different things that I can see looking back. I mean, hindsight's a wonderful tool, isn't it? To be able to see what was in place and what wasn't in place that didn't allow us to really look at our podcast as a way to not only build a platform, but really to start to generate some great, solid leads and to be able to engage and convert those leads into prospects. And that's what I see happen quite often too. And then after I did Career Success Radio, we did that for 2 years. I've had podcasts ever since. Business Success Radio podcast, did that for a while. Ambitious Entrepreneur Show, which is still running, and many others that I produce. And it wasn't until I switched careers from the career industry into working with entrepreneurs that there were some changes that I made. And then all of a sudden I started to realize that some of the listeners then reached out and asked, how can I work with you? So I put together some systems and processes that enabled that relationship just to continue to build. And that's kind of what I want to share with you today, and how you can monetize your message from the outset and become an influential voice in your industry. And it absolutely is possible. I'll give you an example. I spoke a couple of months ago now to new podcasters. They co-host. So there were 2 individual businesses. One was in Sydney, I believe, and the other here in Melbourne. So in different states. But what they had done was a number of these key things too, by accident. But it was interesting because they reached out to me and said, we're at the stage now where our podcast, we've been running for three or 4 weeks. We've now been listed on the charts and iTunes, and it's just gone ballistic. And we want to know now, how can we start to monetize our podcast? So I walked them through some basic steps, but some of the things that they'd done were amazing. They started to get referrals or referrals, obviously, to listen to the podcast, but then some leads, and people would ring and they would ask. And it was interesting. After our conversation, I got a telephone call from the lady that I spoke to. She said, I've just secured my first $1,000 client from her podcast, and it had only been running for about 4 or 5 weeks, but she was able to put into place some key steps. But anyway, let's dive into some of those steps that are so important. And the first one really is, when you're starting a podcast, and for some of you already got podcasts, and maybe some of this is good to look at reflective wise, so that you can make sure that you've got these in place too, so that you can start to accelerate some of the results that are just sitting there waiting for you to start to generate. And the first is really all about purpose. And asking yourself, what is the purpose of starting this podcast? Now, this may seem like Annemarie, what a silly question that is. But really, it's interesting to see that often we don't really put into place some thought around the purpose and the intention that you want for your podcast. Now, as I mentioned, there are a number of people, which is exciting, that are now entering the podcasting space, and they may be vying for your ideal client too, or within the area of the industry that you're dealing with. So what's really important is that you put some real foundational steps in place to be able to support you in, when you do share your message, that you are carving out a unique niche area within your specific demographic or your specific industry. I'm a firm believer that there is so much business for everyone in every organization or in every industry. There absolutely is. But it's just a matter of asking some few key questions and putting some key things in place that will enable you to carve out that niche, so that you've got your specific area of ideal clients that you're working with and who you do your best work with. And then other people working in the industry that's similar to you will also do the same. And there's plenty of business, as I said, for all of you. So some of the things that you need to think about is, yes, why are you starting your podcast? Is this going to be a platform where you're really going to take your message and be able to share that message to a specific demographic, as I mentioned, in that industry? Or are you going to use it as a way to build relationship with other key influencers in your industry who you can then become an alliance partner with, or a referral partner with, or do some joint ventures with as well? What you also need to do now, I just got a message here. Can you see me, Please refresh. Oh, no, that's right. That was just someone else. All right. Just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay. Then I'm coming through okay. Can everyone still hear me? Good, good, good. All right. I'll just continue on. All right. Thanks, Daniel. Also, you want to think about, what angle or message are you going to share that's quite unique and relevant to your ideal client? So often, and I'll share a little bit more about, ideal client, because I think many people who continue to struggle in business anyway, not just even with podcasts and listenerships and obviously building an audience, but businesses in general, when they find that they have not really pierce the market. So in other words, if they haven't really, we call it this the tip of the spear, which really has people in your industry or your ideal client take a step back and really listen to what it is that you're sharing. The reason is, if your message goes unheard and unnoticed, often is because you're speaking too broad and you haven't really defined that unique message, who your ideal client is, and that's not coming across clearly enough within the podcast and across any of your messaging. I think a podcast is great, but should really be one of the key elements that you're using as part of what I call your brand communications wheel. Something else that you need to consider too when you're looking at the purpose of your podcast is how you're going to leverage your podcast. For many of our clients, as I said, it is very much part of a way that they want to build their platform, a great way to build relationships with key influencers in their industry, because they invite those people on their show to be interviewed, a great way to build relationships, as well as, of course, building a voice, and the voice, in fact, in some instances, in some industries, if it's done well, that you can become known as the go-to person, as someone who's got a great content, but also invites great interviewees and guests on the show that's aligned with that specific message. But you can't plan for this if you don't really go through the process in identifying the real purpose and how you're going to leverage your podcast. And then, of course, it's thinking about what action step. What do you want people to take once they've, what action step do you want people to take once they've listened to your show? Now, I know for some people, it's like, well, we know we need to provide absolute value. Fantastic. That's first and foremost. If you're not providing valuable content that's relevant to your ideal client and your audience, then that needs to be visited for sure as the first. But then what's the next step? And often, I find that people are a little bit hesitant to do that because it's like, well, I don't really want to sell to people. I kind of reframe that. The mindset is so important. If you've got someone who's listened to your podcast, you've gotten great content, if it's through yourself that you're sharing, or maybe through a guest that's been on your show, you imagine that your ideal client has just listened to that and you've provided valuable information, but by not providing them with an option or a way in which they can provide, get access to further information, then you're kind of leaving them out there on a limb, aren't you? So, for those people who are ready to take that next step, what is that next step? Have you built that into the funnel or the steps that you'll take people through, guide them through gently, so that at the end of the show, whatever your call to action is, that you state that, and for those who are ready, they'll step forward with you. Let me give you a couple of examples. I typically now work with people who I call the disruptors. They're the people who are sick and tired of the same old in their industry, or they've been disrupted themselves. They're influencers in their own right, in their industries, and they're thought leaders, and they really want to innovate what's going on in their industry. And one example of a client that I recently worked with, she was an online divorce lawyer, which sounds like a really strange business, but she was very much, working with people in the family law industry. But she recognized a while ago that she was really tired of the long hours in court, and she really hated conflict. Interesting career choice for sure, wasn't it? But she realized that there was a real small niche in her industry, or with her ideal clients, that didn't need to go through the bantering and the horrendous things that happened within, unfortunately, her industry, but who did and who were coming to amicable agreement between the asset, splits and all that kind of stuff. And they just needed someone to guide them through the technical, the legal aspects of that, so that it was final and upheld by the law. So she created a whole niche within her business. And now, not only has she developed this whole system that she is doing with her own clients, she's now packaged it and systematized it, and is now bringing that to market through being able to offer that to other divorce lawyers in the family law industry who want more freedom, who want to be able to juggle, life and work a little bit better, and who also are able to then, be able to use her systems to completely open up themselves to this particular market. So what she's done, or what we've worked together, is being able to provide we've done 3 different podcast interviews. And each one has a specific purpose to build engagement with her ideal clients who, she knows them intimately on what they're struggling with, what they're going through, what they're looking for, because they're very much what she was doing in a kind of like 10 years ago. And so those 3 specific podcasts build relationships, deepens the engagement as they take that listener, who is a divorce lawyer, family law solicitor, on a journey to think, maybe that's possible for me. And then the call to action is obviously getting some free resources. It's a checklist. But of course, to do that, they need to give them her their email address. But that now is being promoted and the actual call to action down the track is a membership site. So she's actually using a podcast as a way to build engagement with her, her ideal clients, deepen the relationship, and speed up the take up, if you will, by getting them on her list and then nurturing them that way with a 3-part podcast series. So that's the Online Divorce Lawyer. There's another company that I've just recently finished working with. We're in the process of post-production. We're going to go live with their 3 podcasts, and they're a fintech company, and they very much were disrupted. They're a 40-year plus business who, because of LinkedIn and a lot of other, wonderful technologies that we now use, their business almost, really could see projection-wise that they would be out of business. So they've now developed some incredible software programs. They're now leading the field within the fintech company. And so the 3-part podcast series that we're using for them very much identifies, disruption, how they turn disruption into opportunity, what they did, the steps that they took, because they know now that there are hundreds of other businesses within their industry, trade, credit and risk, who are experiencing the same thing. Changes going on in the market to do with compliance and everything. And if they don't change the way that they do things, if they continue on, though many of them will be out of business. So now this particular company is, through their podcast, they're educating, they're empowering people by saying, you know what, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be a headache. These are some of the things that we did. Here are some solutions that we've now provided for you. And it's a way to build a relationship and engagement. But you can see in both of those specific examples, they knew who their ideal client was. They very much knew what they wanted to share. It had purpose. There's intention behind that. And each of the shows has a specific intention and a call to action and a reason why that it's being developed. So a lot of thought has been gone into all of those 3 different podcasts. So I really encourage you to go back. If you're having a look at the intention or the purpose for your podcast, if you answered those questions I mentioned earlier, and if not, here's a great opportunity for you to start doing so that every single podcast that you share, that you publish, that you produce, really fits in with the bigger picture as to why and how you're going to leverage that to build engagement and become known as that influential voice in your industry. Okay, so here are some other things that I really want to encourage you to start to think about if you haven't already. You've probably heard of some of these things already, which is great, which means it's nothing new, but just going back and revisiting to make sure that you really are so clear on these things, that it shines through everything that you do. Because as we know, sometimes people will binge listen to our podcasts, won't they? And if you've got a consistent message that goes through consistently, so across all of your podcast episodes, even if you're not the person who is being interviewed, so you're the host. One of the things I say to all of my clients is they come for the content and they stay for the host. So if you've provided an incredible experience for a listener, they'll want to come back because they've enjoyed spending the time, however long your podcast is. So I really want you to spend time on these things that I want to talk about. So firstly, your brand. We know that there's so much noise and so much clutter going on. There's a website and it's skips what it was. Let me see if I can remember. Internet Stats Live. I believe it's that one.com. Now, if you go to that, it updates to the second of all of the content that's being shared. It hasn't yet picked up on podcasts yet, but it does blogs, it does tweets, it does amount of videos that have been done, emails, and some of these are in the billions every single day. Now, that is a lot of noise. That's a lot of clutter. Thankfully, there are not billions and billions and billions of podcasts out there yet, which means that, we've got a great opportunity to really build a strong foundation in our specific area of expertise. But you need to consider, what do you and your company stand for when it comes to your brand? If I do a lot of, speaking and consulting work with organizations around brand, particularly now, it's so important as consumers have changed. And I don't know if you've heard of a new consumer that has been labelled. And I read this on CEO Institute here in Australia. There was some experts that they got to write some articles, and it's called a new entrepreneurial customer, and they seem to come from two demographics. So there's mums and there's also millennials. And some of the common characteristics was that they love to be inspired. They're very time poor, both of those demographics, the mums and the millennials. They're technology minded. So in other words, they pick up, on podcasts. So if you imagine that you've got a, fantastic podcast that empowers and inspires them, it helps them get their time back in order to, maybe that's your area of expertise. But, if you're able to give them content that they can consume that's not going to take up that much time, they're going to love you. Something else about this new entrepreneurial customer too is that they are community minded, which means that they love to share some things with their community that is of absolute help to them, which means if you've got a podcast and content that is on brand, that's got a consistent message, that's helpful, that's inspiring and empowering them, guess what? They are going to take that and become almost ambassadors for your podcast message by sharing it with your community. So these are things that you need to consider as well, when you're thinking about your brand. Now, there's three different things that I want you to really start to get clear on if you have not yet. It's your vision, your values, and your mission statement. Those are three key things. There's obviously more to when you're building a brand, but these are the three things I want you to start to think about. Now, your vision, for me, if I think about our vision, particularly the Ambitious Entrepreneur Podcast Network, it's about making a difference. And I actually put a figure on it, making a difference in the lives of 1 billion people together. Now, 1 billion people is a lot of people, but I know that it's not just me. It is my clients, it's the podcast guests that I have, it's the other fantastic podcasters. Once they share the message, I think together we can impact the world for the better. And so that's my vision. And it's amazing, here I am, when I mentioned earlier about Zimbabwe, every single day there's, I get an opportunity, 5 minutes to speak, to speak hope, to speak inspiration, to speak positivity into the lives of people on the local Zimbabwe radio station. And I think their listenership is about 500,000 people. That's incredible, isn't it? To think that my voice is able to impact them, and just like your voice is able to impact people too. So what's your vision? What vision do you have? People know, like, and trust other people who are very similar to them. And I think when you have a vision, when you understand values and have similar values to your ideal client, and they can pick that up across the conversations you have, the guests that you have and invite on to your podcast, then this is going to make an incredible difference in them really feeling that they know you, they like you, and they trust you. So what's your vision? Do you have a really big vision? Now, values are really important too. As I said, values, particularly if you can have similar values to your clients and your ideal clients, what a clear, important values for them too. And if you can align the two, that just means that your message and the experience that you create, that's what it's all about. The experience that you create on your podcast, through the guests, through the content you share, that's going to make an absolute difference for sure. Now, just some of our values, we're all about education, we're all about empowerment and excellence. You know, we want to bring excellence to the content that we share so that people who listen feel empowered. They think, man, maybe I can do that too, through the content that we share. And of course, community is very important with us as well, you know, collaborating with like-minded people who are up to really great things. And of course, our mission, when you think about your mission, I'll share ours as an example so that you can use that as you're thinking about what your mission is. It's really about making a difference by being the difference. And I often will use the logo or the slogan, if you will, and also the hashtag about be the difference. So we know that, or I know, and my guests know that every single time, you know, we share a story, one of hope, one of inspiration, maybe even sharing some things about what didn't go so right, because we can all learn from, you know, the mistakes that we made and the things that we did that we think, well, you know, I'm not going to do that again. Everybody learns from that. Everyone can be empowered by that. So we want to be the difference in the world. So to make a difference, we have to be the difference. And that's really something that drives us. And I hope that that's really every time someone listens to a show, whether it be any of the podcasts that we host or produce, that will pick up, you know, that's something that they will pick up, the experience that creates through that. So think about what your mission is. So this is your vision, your values, and your mission. Now, if I go back to Career Success Radio, remember that podcast I started back in 2008 with my co-host, that was all about inspiring hope and possibility by educating and empowering job seekers in this new world of work. You know, they needed to change the way in their approach in how they were doing job search. No longer were there a lot of jobs being advertised, but they had to seek out opportunities by networking more, by really leveraging the relationships that they had built over time. So for those people who didn't do a lot of networking, for them, they really had to take a step back and start to do some networking specifically, you know, as part of their career and their job search. So again, you know, what is it that you stand for, and incorporate that within your brand message. Okay, so that's your brand. Then the aspect number 2 that I really want you to consider, I've spoken about it already today, but this is your ideal client. So many times people will say, well, you know, my product or my service or what I'm sharing is relevant to everybody. And one of the things that I'll often say is that if you're speaking to everybody, sadly, you speak to no one, because it's too broad. Your message is too broad and it's not specific enough. It's not niche down enough in order to cut through that noise. And I think today, specifically to cut through, and there's this great saying that I mentioned earlier, tip of the spear, and it's not something that I made up, but the tip of the spear is something that is so uniquely you and what you're talking about. It pierces through all of the other clutter and the noise that's going on long enough for people to actually step back and think, this person, this podcast, this content that consistently is being shared, there's some real great content there that no one else is really speaking about. Now, sometimes the difference can be how you deliver it. That's very much too part of the experience that you create, which you talked about your brand. So, you know, there's when you really integrate the two and you get really clear on that, that's when you can really create that tip of the spear. But here are the things that I want you to consider. So your ideal client, the problem that they are struggling with, and you've probably heard this all before, and the reason is it's so important. So if you haven't got even clearer, I encourage you to take some steps and chunk down even further. So for me, if I think about who I'm dealing with, I mean, I can support a lot of different organizations in creating their podcasts, you know, depending on what purpose that they have for their podcast, any organization, particularly service-based. But I've decided that I want to work with people who are disrupting their industries, people who are innovators, people who are influencers already, and are doing something differently. Now, it's interesting because I didn't actually select them, because someone asked me at a networking meeting, so who is it that you love to work with? And when I thought about all of the clients that I've been working with over the last 6 to 8 months, because I call this the accidental niche. My background is actually in brand and communications. I've just loved podcasting. But now a lot of my clients have come to me and said, we want you to show us how to do that, and can you help us? So I call this the accidental niche. But when I took a step back, I could see, you know what, they're all doing something quite unique in the industry. So why I share that is, maybe take a step back from your specific clients who you've been dealing with. Is there a theme? Are there some commonalities between some of your top clients, some of the best clients who you love to work with, that you can see, you know what? This is a really unique or a smaller core of the market. It's a niche of the marketplace that I can really hang my hat on because I've already got a number of clients in that area and I love to work with them. So I encourage you to take a step back and do some exploration around that to really niche down even further, because once you've got that strong niche, then your message really, like wildfire goes through, because people will pick it up. They'll listen to you and they'll really understand that you are speaking to the heart and soul of what they're struggling with. That'll often happen. Something else that you want to consider too, we know from marketing that it's important to understand the demographics of our clients, but also the psychographics of our clients too. And you might have heard this before. This is really being clear around, more of the emotions. What is your ideal client struggling with? What keeps them up at night? What are some of the key words that they're using within how they describe what they're struggling with, and also too what they're looking for? And a great strategy that I was told many years ago, and this is to do with in copywriting, to be able to really tap into the pulse of your ideal client, what they're struggling with, if we're talking about the psychographics, is go to Amazon and Google within your particular industry. So for instance, let's take finance or budgeting or something, subject we all love to talk about, budgeting, and look for some books around that. And this is if your ideal client was, that this is your level of industry. You can use this example for you, but let's just say budgeting. Go to the books that have got the higher comments and then go and read the comments that have been left for that particular book. Now, in those comments are golden nuggets. What are people saying? I was struggling with so-and-so till I read this book, and now I feel like I'm so-and-so. Those words that they use in the description of how they were feeling, how they're feeling now, what the results have been, that kind of thing, that is what you want to make note of. That is what you want to take, time to really read and understand. You'll be able to do that and get a real clear idea of what your ideal client is saying, how they're saying it, what they're describing, all of those words. Because if you can pick that up within your podcast, if you can say to them, I get you, you're worrying about your finances and how are you going to pay the bills when they come in, and you're tired of coming to the end of the month, before payday, you got nothing left. Those are words that you've been able to identify through the research that you've been doing. If you incorporate that into your language, that is when, again, you're really going to get to the heart and soul of your client, and they'll feel like you know them, because you do. So those are things that you need to consider. And so if I use an example of the online divorce lawyer, she knew exactly what her ideal client was struggling with because she'd gone through it herself. And there was a number of people who were already in her membership program who she was working with that also described the same feelings, the exhaustion, the conflict, being worn out, feeling burnt out. These are all words that she knew that her ideal client was struggling with. So they were now incorporated into the podcast. So make sure that you do some research, keep a journal, write that all down. And then once you understand that, then every time that you speak to your ideal client, when you start to incorporate some of those words, they'll know exactly that they're speaking to you or you're speaking to them. So that's your ideal client. The third aspect that I want to talk about today is your message. If you're not clear on your message, sometimes we get an opportunity to stand up in front of a networking organization and they say, right, you got 30 seconds or a minute or whatever it is, go. And for many of us, it's like, and we just, garble things out. If you're not clear on your message, if you're not clear on exactly what it is that you are here to support your ideal clients, guess what? It's going to be very hard for them to understand what it is that you can do for them. So I really encourage you to spend some time in being able to really narrow it down. But I want you to take it even a step further, particularly now that we've got a lot of noise and a lot of clutter. And you can incorporate this within your intro and your show, to your show, and even your outro as well. the same old's not really going to do it. For many of us, or many people, they say, well, we provide the best customer service possible. Well, guess what? I think as business owners, that is just an absolute, we need to do that and need to provide excellent for our customers for sure. Otherwise, why should we be in business? Really think about, what is it that's quite unique? Is there maybe a disruptive message that you can share? What is it? So there's two things often that I will share with people to get them thinking, your creative juices. There's two things. So what are you passionate about your industry, that you really, the message that you want to share, and what really pees you off about your industry? Between the two of those, that can often be able to get clear on a real cut-through message, what you're passionate about and what pees you off. And what do I mean by that? What's happening in your industry that every time you hear someone else talk about it, you think, oh, there they go again. That's so wrong because it's not relevant anymore. That was, yesteryear, or times have changed. It's going to go on, deaf ears, that kind of thing. Maybe then you can speak life, or you can speak a fresh opinion or a fresh way of doing something in your industry that no one else is speaking about before. Or if maybe a few other people are, you can do it differently because your style is different. How you speak is quite different. You might be a bubbly, naturally, happy person. Well, guess what? If that's really much part of who you are, how you show up, it needs to be part of your brand experience, needs to be very much part of how you show up for your podcast, because people will consistently recognize that that's who you are and how you show up. Here's some other things. What are you doing differently that is really working? Maybe you've tweaked something. Maybe there's a different approach. I know that I recently interviewed someone in the real estate industry. She wants to disrupt her space. So her message is all about why pay, tens of thousands of dollars to real estate agents when, it's really quite simple to be able to do it yourself. And so she's got a lot of content online, created this incredible platform, and now is bringing her message out there to be able to share to consumers or potential sellers, property sellers, that there's an easy way to do that, and it's not going to cost them necessarily tens of thousands of dollars. And her balance was between being passionate about her industry and being peed off by the fact that so many consumers were being ripped off. That was her words. So you can see a balance in between those. If I think about my fintech client, they very much were passionate about their industry, had been in that industry for 40 plus years. But now what peed them off is the fact that there's so many changes around, in compliance and government. That's a whole other topic we're not going to go into here. Here in Australia, it keeps changing the rules with compliance and things like that. So their message was, it doesn't need to be confusing. And in fact, we've taken the confusion out of this whole thing for you. And we've created some really simple solutions to be able to help you, be able to do what you do best, which is around trade credit and risk, and not have to worry about all of the compliance details. They've, between what's passionate for them in their industry and what pees them off in their industry, they've been able to create and craft this unique message that they're now sharing. What other things that I want to share in that industry? Very important. It's kind of what you stand for. And here's why it's so important. I think when you have a message that you stand for, it's very much part of your why, it aligns with your values, all of the things that I've spoken about today. There's a level of confidence that comes from the inside that you just can't capture and try and fake. It is authentically you. And I know for some people, they think that word authentic has been brandished around the place. But I tell you what, when you understand your values, your mission, your vision, your purpose, your why, your stand for, what gets you up every single day that has you podcast after podcast, share your message through your own content and the guests that you invite on your show. That then will really consistently show up, and people will get to know, like, and trust you, that you are speaking, inspiration, speaking truth, that you are the go-to person. You're becoming the influential voice in the message. And the reason is that you love this so much, that it's who you are and how you're bringing this forward, within your podcast. And of course, all of the other wonderful marketing that you're doing in your business. You need to be very clear on that. And I think also too, you know, once you understand those, you really do have a strong and compelling message that very much uniquely is you. And I think what often has people not really standing up and standing out and becoming that influential voice is there's still a little bit of doubt around, you know, is it, who am I to share this? Who are you not to share this? If this is a message that's been placed on your heart, if you've got the gifts and strengths and talents to be able to share in you know, your area of expertise, who are you not to share that message? There are people out there who are struggling with whatever it is that you're an expert in, that you can support, that you can take them through and to be out of their struggles and into, you know, area of freedom, whatever it might be in your industry. And by not sharing yet your message and not getting clear on that, then your ideal client continues to struggle. Now, let me just see whether there are any questions there. Hopefully this is all making sense. Okay, so let me just sum this up. I know that we're nearly at the top of the hour. So how do you monetize your message and become an influential voice in your industry? You know, it can take time. It absolutely can take time. But I tell you what, when you start to build momentum, when you start to get people who, you know, email you, even if it's one person or three people, whatever, you know, I would rather have 100 engaged listeners than 1 million listeners who don't do anything. I mean, can I get an amen? I mean, you've got great podcasters who, you know, have millions and millions of followers. Fantastic. But really, you know, if you've niched in a market and it's a smaller market and you've gotten your message, you absolutely know who they are, what they're struggling with, and you can, you know, share your voice, share your message to speak into their lives to make an impact. For me, I know that I would rather have 100 people who are listening consistently to my show and putting their hands up and saying, yes, your call to action, I'm ready to make a move. How can we work together? What can I do? That kind of thing. I think that is far better because, yeah, you've got a message out there. So here in closing, your purpose. Why are you starting your podcast? How are you going to leverage it? Focus on that. Focus on the people who you are wanting to impact. Focus on the lives that you want to change rather than, you know, how many downloads did I get? Guess what? You might have had 5 downloads on that podcast when you launched it. One of those people might have been struggling. One of those people might have been just about at the point of giving up and walking away. But because of your voice, because of the message that you shared today with them in their podcast, getting a bit emotional here, they've made a decision. You know what? My life is worth far more than that. I've just heard him or her say something on their podcast, and guess what? I think I can do that too. Isn't that much better than having millions of downloads and not hearing, you know, the impact that you're making? So your purpose, what's the purpose of your podcast? Your brand. If you're not clear on what makes you unique, how are you going to expect others to know? And for those of you who've just that inner chatter, that inner voice said, oh, there's not really anything much unique. BS. Every single one of us has been given gifts, talents, strengths to be able to impact the world. If you have not yet identified clearly what yours is, take some time to do that. Once you do, you can make a much bigger impact in the world once you understand what that is. Your ideal client, niche, niche, niche. If you speak to everyone, you speak to no one. Who is it? Is there a specific demographic in your industry that you absolutely love to work with? I think that maybe is someone that you, or a group of someone's that you can really, you know, start to really plant that flag in the sand. You say, this is an area that I really want to speak life into. This is what I'm going to do. And even if that starts off small, guess what? Podcasts can be listened everywhere. Actually, funny story. I had someone who I was working with. She said, I really only want to have people in Australia listen. And it's like, okay, well, you do realize that people from all over the world can access your podcast. And for her, you know, she just was like, wow, really? You can impact the world. You never know where your voice ends up. And then, of course, your message. You know, what unique angle can you bring to your podcast, and what experience are you creating as you continue to share it along the way, and sharing. Okay, so got a lot of amens. Good stuff. Excellent. Just what questions have you got? I know that I've been doing a lot of speaking. I hope that it's been helpful for you. I want to take a bit of time towards the end here to see if anyone's got any questions that I might be able to share a bit more information. Binge listen. I've never had that. Oh, it's interesting. I just met this young woman who loves podcasts, and it's so exciting for me when I, share to people, because sometimes I get that blank stare. I don't know how many of you do. It's like, what? Thankfully, it's getting into a stage now where we're educating a lot more people. She said, I love podcasts. And we met at a networking event that evening. I shared the link on how she could access. And the next day she said, I just listened to the last show. And she said, I laughed out loud when your guest shared this joke. She said, I can't wait to download and binge listen to all of them. And that's what, I find people do. When you get clear on all of the things that I mentioned to you earlier today, that's what will often happen. People can't wait to spend more time with you as the host, because you're the common factor within the podcast. Even if you have other guests that join you, you are the common host. And the example I often give is that, if you think of Oprah, we all, you either love Oprah or you hate Oprah. And she was obviously on television, but she was not the expert. She invited guests onto her stage, onto her platform. Yet we always couldn't wait to watch I loved Oprah. We couldn't wait to watch another show, because she was the constant. She was the one who was the storyteller. She was the curious one who really wove the story, but created the experience upon which her guest could provide their content. So that's really important. Let's have a look. I host a soccer podcast, First Team Pod. It's hard to connect with people in that way. We all support the same team. Oh, goodness, that would be fantastic. I mean, there's the commonality and the passion of sporting. My goodness, you could, that I can imagine that you could really engage, with your ideal listeners for sure. It's hard to connect with people in that way. Just the passion, the commonality. I mean, here in Australia, I don't know, where are you, First Team Pod? Are you based, which country are you based? Here in Australia, we have what we call the AFL, and today's the grand final day. Today is probably a day you can walk through the streets and it's like, where is everyone? It's, if, something weird going on. That's because so many of them are crazy about their football. They're all off either at the USA, New York City. Well, you guys have got some passion there too with your footy teams. But yeah, here, find a commonality. What is it about your audience? Because there may be some people that, quite a demographic of your audience that that really loves this, commonality. Now, once you can understand or identify what that is, I mean, every time people hear your podcast, they can't wait to hear, because the way you're discussing it, just the way you're bringing that forward. But absolutely, I think in sporting team, the commonality and the engagement that you can create with people, absolutely. Spirit of Riley, I need some help outside of here to dial down the target based on cause and movement that I want to create. Is this something you do, Annemarie? Yeah, absolutely. It is. Reach out. You might have my details. Annemarie coaches my podcast, my Twitter handle, or just shoot me an email, info@annemariecross.com, and we can do some brainstorming there. Reblank stare, Amanda Kendall. Yes, how do you suggest educating people in their 40 to 60 year age group, especially Australia, about what a podcast is? There may be a smaller demographic that are actually starting to increase their listenership of podcasts. The way, again, is a smaller niche. Once people understand how to access this, for instance, I've got colleagues who have only just, and they're in their 60s, they've only just found podcasts. They cannot get enough of them. And in fact, a lot of them, we call them grey nomads. They travel around Australia. They download all of the podcasts that they want to listen to, and her and her husband will drive along and they'll listen to these podcasts. So again, what you need to do, I think, is find a unique demographic. I mean, if you identify the content that they want to hear, the information that they are looking for, then you can provide some really great content around that. And it's just a matter of getting out in front of them and knowing where they are, so that you can educate them, let them know about your particular podcast. So I see you there, Daniel. So just interrupt me. I'll just keep scrolling through here to see if there's any last minute questions that I can answer before we finish. Okay, good. I think That's all the questions that I can see.
Well, Annemarie, this has been fantastic. I mean, so inspirational for, I think, the people who are thinking about starting a podcast, and a great reflection for those who are in that tough spot with their podcast and kind of questioning things or trying to look into new directions. So thank you very much, Annemarie, for sharing this.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
So tell us again where we can get your own podcast and check out, learn more about you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my web address is annemariecross.com, but there's two podcasts that I have, which are Ambitious Entrepreneur Show. So you can find that on iTunes. But if you go to my podcast network website, the ambitiousentrepreneurnetwork.com, ambitiousentrepreneurnetwork.com, that's the best place to go and find that. So Ambitious Entrepreneur Show, and then Women in Leadership is another podcast that I have there too. So
Fantastic.
Those are the best places.
Well, thank you very much, Annemarie. We really appreciate your being here, coming from down under and participating with us in International Podcast Day. So I'll let you go. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Bye for now.
And everyone else, we've got a whole lot more content to come. We've worked out some of the technical bugs. So when this session is over, if you're watching this live, then you will need to refresh the page, and then the live refreshing should work after that. Technical things come up here and there, but as podcasters, we're familiar with that kind of stuff. Before we go, though, I want to give huge shout out and thanks to our wonderful sponsors. First of all, Blueberry, our platinum sponsor. They're a full service podcast hosting company and podcasting company providing hosting, statistics, podcast advertising opportunities. You are probably familiar with the extremely popular, it's the #1 podcasting plugin for WordPress, PowerPress. That's made by Blueberry. And today, Blueberry also offers free WordPress hosting and pro podcast statistics with every podcast hosting account. So be sure to check out their session that's coming up tomorrow, Podcast Problems, What to Do When Things Go Wrong, and also another session, Proven Social Media Strategies for Podcasters. These will be fantastic sessions. You won't want to miss them. Learn more about Blueberry and what they have to offer at blueberry.com. That's without the E's. I can't even type the name of the fruit anymore properly because I always type it without the E's. That just happens. Blueberry.com without the E's. Thank you to Blueberry, our platinum sponsor. Also, thanks to Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. Today, September 29th, is supposedly National Coffee Day. What a great day to then be the day before Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, our gold sponsor, launches with their cafe, which is an in-person working cafe serving the finest espresso and coffee drinks. And yes, it's espresso. Listen to this week's episode of Grammar Girl if you doubt that. Within the coffee shop, there is 2 working podcasting and video podcasting studios where podcasters will be scheduling their time to do their podcasts in front of their studio audience. Fantastic opportunity to do something live, and the grand opening of Studio 21 is on International Podcast Day. So appropriate. They'll be serving coffee drinks throughout the day and broadcasting live. So visit them at studio21podcast.cafe. That is the web address, studio21podcast.cafe. Thank you for your support. Also, thanks to The Messengers, a podcast documentary, another gold sponsor. They are the documentary to share with people, to show them the power of podcasting. You see the big name podcasters, the smaller podcasters, podcasters you may have never heard of. And this podcast documentary is a journey through the modern world of podcasting, and it uncovers the magic behind why podcasters do what they do. Produced by award-winning filmmakers, this documentary chronicles the nationwide growth of podcasting as well as the future of it. Get your own copy. You will love this. It's entertaining. It's informative. It's great to show with the family to help them know what you do in podcasting. It's available on iTunes and on Amazon by visiting themessengersdoc.com. And thanks to Potable, our silver sponsor. That's P-O-D-I-B-L-E. If you're looking for your favorite podcast or looking for your next favorite podcast, then check out PODIBLE.co to learn more about Potable. They're a podcast discovery engine, and they provide podcast recommendations tailored to you. endless episodes, robust recommendation engine, streamlined social sharing capabilities, and much more. So you can go beyond simply listening and start transforming your podcast listening experience. Learn more from Podable by going to play.podable.co. That's play.podile.co. And thanks to our bronze sponsors, the Audacity to Podcast, Modern Life Podcast Network, and Podbean. We'll be back in just a couple minutes. Make sure you refresh the video right after this one stops, and we'll tell you that in the chat room. internationalpodcastday.com. Keep podcasting, keep celebrating, keep using that hashtag International Podcast Day. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back in just a minute.